Welcome. You're listening to Retirement with Meaning. I'm Carmen Aceta, I'm your host, and this is episode number 6, Retirement Solutions, Digging Deeper. I imagine that you found my podcast either now for the first time or sometime earlier because you were looking for information, possibly even help, as you began contemplating retirement, were actually retired, either very recently or retired for some time. And you wouldn't be alone if you're having troubling feelings. Do any of these sound familiar? Anxiety, depression, boredom, loneliness, confusion. And furthermore, you might be feeling or trying to avoid feeling discouraged about the whole thing. It's a time of change for certain. And change often is daunting, especially if you have been retired and had been in your career for a long time. You're probably pretty good at it. You know how to do it, and you're confident. But when you think of all that going away, and now you're faced with a new mode of life, that can certainly easily raise those feelings that I just mentioned and a whole lot more. Well, on a positive note, you're the person for whom I created my podcast. I'll tell you a little background as how I came to get to this work. But in my psychotherapy practice, I generally had an older clientele. And in the final 5 years or so of my practice, I became very interested in what's termed the second half of life. And when I began to implement the principles I learned, I was amazed at the help they were to my retirement age clients. The problem became that I could only see a limited number of people face to face, and I wanted to make the same richness of help available to more people. Seeing how people struggled with retirement solutions that I knew I had helped others with was almost painful at times. And I became rather frustrated that I couldn't get the very good, helpful news to more people. People clearly benefited face to face. I did some individual work, mostly though it was through what I called my second half of life groups. Unfortunately, people are often uncomfortable in any group, let alone a group in which they knew they were going to be asked to self-disclose about important things and to be interested in other persons disclosing. So while there always seemed to be a cry, we need more groups in the psychotherapy field, I came to find that getting one together was a lot like pulling teeth. It wasn't easy, but when I was able to pull it off, the results were always very good. When I retired, I decided that I wanted to see if I could do something online and produce as close as possible to the excellent results I had gotten the normal way, face-to-face, at least normal for me. And I've worked hard at this, thought about it a lot, and came up with some ideas I liked, but now I have to test them. And I can share with you that in my practice, I was told that by colleagues and by clients that my success was due to who I was, more so than what I did or what I knew, I guess, and the connection that I made with my clients. Frankly, I don't know if I can duplicate that online or how much it's necessary. There are a lot of unknowns here. I'll use what online provides that I didn't have face-to-face. And the technology aspect, it has certainly been daunting. I was in the 8th grade, I believe, when the first black and white television sets came out. And if your history goes back to that time, you remember that the screen was black and white and about as big as a standard dinner plate. It took me quite a time to begin using computers and to gain some sense of proficiency with them. And my children have been trying to buy me a smartphone for years, and I resist. I tell them I don't want one. So, talking about new and change, I certainly experienced some of that in beginning to do this work in a very new environment for me, to say the least. My career as a psychotherapist began in addiction treatment, and it didn't take me very long to come to believe that much of what Alcoholics Anonymous and the other 12-step programs taught would be good for anyone, addicted or not. It was really a program of spiritual growth. And not coincidentally, spiritual growth is really a main part of the second half of life, or of what roughly turns out to be our retirement years or our elder years. The authors of the Big Book of AA wrote, "We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start." My main concept in this work is that to have satisfying or good or whatever your goal is for your retirement years, your second half of life, your elder years, requires change. That the mode of our first half of life doesn't work anymore in the second half. And also, the second half provides a wealth of growth opportunities. And as Carl Jung said, an opportunity to come to know our true self, which can also be rather scary. Change and newness generally makes us anxious. We seem to be wired for being grounded, solid, at ease, not in a state of disturbance. We are bound to experience discomfort as we contemplate retirement, growing older, being in our second half of life. So in order to grow and reap the benefits of second half of life work, we have to be willing to experience discomfort and not allow it to stop us. It's what I call developing a new relationship with anxiety. And the new part is that rather than making our anxiety go away, that we're willing to learn how to deal with it, experience it, move through it, and come out on the other end where the riches lie, and even transforming our anxiety to joy, which at this point might sound what? But it's true, and you'll hear about that in my earlier podcast and in ones to come. In conducting drug and alcohol treatment, I used to tell the patients a little formula that recovery equals abstinence plus change. Now, any recovering alcoholic I ever talked to agreed that abstinence from alcohol was very difficult, but the change was even harder. One of the criteria that makes an addict and not just an abuser or a social user is that the addict uses his or her drug of choice as the way to help him get through life. He might not be able to voice that in those terms, but it's what he or she is doing. They believe that without that drug of choice, they would not be able to get through life. It becomes their very best friend. So to ask an addict to go into recovery and become a recovering addict is to ask them to give up the main thing that gets them through life. I don't know if moving into retirement is that intense for you. It may well be, but it certainly is a move into a very different way of being or doing in the world. And it definitely requires change. So a main part of my approach is to help people to know the role of anxiety and then how to use it to help them to grow rather than to make them retreat from life, so to speak, and just try to stay in the familiar land they might have been in for the last 65 or 60 or 50 or whatever number of years. Well, I realize you already might be thinking, whoa, this approach is way more than I want to take on. I'm retiring. I want to kick back. I want to take it easy. I want to go have some fun. I want to travel. All legitimate things. So, what I'm about to say might sound like a contradiction of what I just said, but I don't believe it is, though. I mentioned elsewhere that I was amazed at how quickly clients in my second half of life groups made progress. And the work didn't have that sort of grinding heaviness that therapy can, just deep, deep, serious, intense. And even though they were dealing with weighty issues, I came to see 5 contributing factors. One, my clients were older and had just grown tired of dragging baggage along with them. They were finally ready to change. 2, they were learning the crucial differences about the second half of life and had begun to implement them. 3, I think they had, by and large, done their therapy work. Now they needed information, guidance, support. 4, they had group support of similarly motivated people. And this is one of the keys that I'm concerned about in attempting to move this work online and away from face-to-face. And 5, with support, they didn't let anxiety stop them. How terribly important having the right support and allowing the right support is for a successful outcome to all this. I'm going to share with you now an example of the 5 points that I just gave you of an actual person in one of my second half of life groups. Like many people, she was rather leery of being in a group face-to-face with other people, but she knew that she needed some kind of help. She had been interested since the first time I had mentioned the group to her. She had been raised on a farm where her parents and all the children had to work very hard. In adult life, she was a successful businesswoman, but she couldn't allow herself to relax. She had to overwork in order to feel she had worked enough and not somehow disobey her parents or let the family down. Someone could have suggested to her that she get a relaxing hobby or something like that, but it wouldn't have worked. She would have felt guilty and stopped doing it. She had to tolerate uncomfortable feelings as she went deeper to self-examine and reassess with help and support. And in a relatively short time, she not only eased up on herself, but began to renew relationships she had neglected in all her busyness. And also in a relatively short time, she sold her business and went into something that had heart for her and left her with time to engage in other pursuits that called to her. The beauty of this second half of life work, and at least one of the beauties in my view, is that it not only in this case helped her to make a very specific change that she needed to make, but that change then influences not just the one specific environment or aspect of her life that she knew she wanted to do something with, but it would affect other things. It affected her relationships. It would be a, quote, solution for other issues she might have been having, so that if she had 7 altogether, that one that she addressed would also impact those other 6 things in her life that possibly could use some help as well. Well, if you're searching, that's good. And I congratulate you on being proactive in going after the retirement you might want or even long for, but also have some degree of fear concerning. To me, there are 3 basics that increase your chances of creating the retirement you hope for, or just your elder years, or your second half of life, wherever that is. 1 is to take responsibility for making the changes. As with therapy in general, and this is not therapy per se, but it is a growth project, hopefully, it happens when we take responsibility. As long as we feel that issues are out of our hands, they're being dictated by some alignment of the stars or whatever, It's not in our hands. We're not likely to do anything much. The second is to acquire the information you need. And the third, enlist and use the appropriate help and support. So I hope you will continue to listen to my podcasts, to pursue other things that might help you as well. But I'm certainly willing to be a part of whatever it is you're trying to create or deal with in a way that's growth-oriented, healing, good for you. I'm going to pause now for a sort of infomercial, and after that, we'll come back to a new relationship with anxiety, which I've mentioned a number of times, but really haven't elaborated on much. First, I'm happy to let you know that the contact form on my mini website is working now. So if you go to retirementwithmeaning.com, that will take you to my small couple page or so website. And if you click on contact, it will show you the contact form, which you can use then if you want to ask a question, if you have a comment, if you have a request for a topic or a suggestion, any way in which you might want to communicate with me. That's available now. Second thing I want to throw in here is the importance of how we think about retirement. It will have a major impact on how well our retirement goes, on how well we can deal with issues, problems, scared feelings, loneliness, whatever we're anticipating, and move on to doing what we have to do to have those issues not interfere with the retirement we might like to have. So I especially urge you, because you are, if you are of retirement age right now, or already retired or getting close to it, thinking about it, be careful of how you let negative messages impact you. Messages particularly from our culture and from people who you know and you say something to about what you're planning, thinking about, or worrying about, and they give you a kind of a negative or down take on it. So you want to have the support of people who are, if not like-minded, at least they care about you and they care about what you're pursuing. And they want to be supportive, even though they might not know exactly what to say. It's just one of the things that happens with an addict is they hear very strongly what we call the addiction voice, particularly if they're in a bar or somewhere where they're shooting up or whatever they're doing among people who are also into addiction. So one of the big things that's important for their recovery is to be around, and it's a big reason for 12-step meetings. So they're around people who also are getting healthier and who they can not only hear good things from, but see the difference in that person's life and want some of that. So if you're around people who are living a good retirement and enjoying it and whatever all goes with that, just being around them can help you as you watch how their life is going and can make you think, yeah, I want some of that too, and go for it. Third, in any kind of work that we're doing, particularly along self-development, healing, recovery, any kind of therapeutic work that's healing, helpful. The, quote, real problem, end quote, isn't so much the problem itself, but it's our approach to the problem, our way of thinking about it. And as I've said, once we make some changes in the way we think and in the way we go after things, in sometimes even our beliefs, then we're much more likely not only to impact that particular concrete problem we're dealing with, but other problems also, because we will bring basically the same approach to other things that we're trying to deal with. I think this is particularly important in second half of life type work. As Albert Einstein said, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. And that would certainly apply here, because what we're often trying to do is bring a first half of life or pre-retirement level of consciousness to the second half of life, which really, among other things that I'll get to as we go along, but the second half of life is much more about being. It's much more about spirituality. It's much more about going inward, going deeper. I'm not saying that doing is not important in the second half of life. It certainly is. But I think if we're on the right track, then there's a different quality to our doing, or a difference in what we do, based on how we're changing in our being. And not coincidentally, we find, or can find, that relationships become much more important in the second half of life if they haven't been in our busier first half of life. And that includes relationship with self as well. And I think James Hollis, who I mentioned in podcast 5, what he had to say bears directly on what I've just been saying here too. And he said, I quote, "All of us, even while functioning at a high level, will carry pockets of depression, for parts of our psychological nature will have been thwarted, remain unfed, unacknowledged, unloved. Even when we bring these pockets of depression to consciousness, so often the way forward is fraught with anxiety, as it takes us into new territory, asks more of us than ever before, and causes us to grow up by demanding full responsibility for how our lives turn out. But as we noted earlier, this anxiety must be chosen over depression, for it is developmental, and depression is regressive. Anxiety is the price of the ticket to life. Intrapsychic depression is the byproduct of our refusal to come aboard." And that was James Hollis, PhD, who is a Jungian analyst and was, I don't believe he's there anymore, a professor at Notre Dame. Before I begin to talk to you about a new relationship with anxiety, which I said we would do after the infomercial, I first have to talk to you about the familiar relationship with anxiety. So any change we're trying to make, before we can do the new thing, we have to know, how am I doing it the old way, or how am I doing it now? It helps to be very familiar with exactly what you're doing, how you're thinking, whatever the results are, all those pertinent things. So our familiar relationship with anxiety goes something like this, and perhaps you can add some nuances of your own. We have in there, either as a conscious thought or at least operating in our head, anxiety is awful, and I have to make it go away as quickly as possible, or get away from it, or something bad's going to happen. I'm not suggesting, first of all, that we don't make anxiety, quote, go away. We're not supposed to stay in a state of anxiety all our life. Next, we can see anxiety as shameful somehow. And I can't let people see that I'm anxious, or they'll know whatever our fear is, that I'm defective, that I'm incompetent, I can't do this job. We can do a whole series of negative things snowballing on us. Another one is, I'm starting to feel anxious, I better not go where I was heading. And there, very clearly, the anxiety stops us from doing something which maybe would be good for us, needed done, involves letting somebody else down, whatever, but it very definitely puts a stop to whatever direction we were going to go, which might have been quite good. One of our other thoughts can be, if I'm anxious, my performance is going to suffer, so I have to get rid of this anxiety first. An unfortunate offshoot of this thinking can be that we won't do anything, or we won't do anything new, or anything which at all concerns us, until we have all our ducks in a row. And what often happens is we never get the ducks in a row. And so we wind up cut off from, once again, things that might have been good for us, but we never got to them because we never were quite on top of our anxiety, or we're missing something else. Well, I'll do that when I finish my master's degree, or I'll do that when the children are raised, or any number of ways that we can delay what it was that may be calling to us, but is also somewhat scary. Boosting it up a little, I can begin to think, this is really bad. I'm going to have a panic attack. And then I do, because my thought about having it brings it on. And under the worst circumstances, perhaps, oh my God, I'm having a panic attack. I'm going to die. And I'm not being facetious here, because a bad panic attack can feel like we're going to have a heart attack, we're going to die, something awful is going to happen. So that's the familiar relationship with anxiety that I've seen in others and experienced myself. And sure, I wouldn't want to prolong that a second longer than absolutely necessary. But ironically enough, we often do prolong it by our approach, by our thinking about it. And not only do we prolong a single episode, but we increase the likelihood that there will be future episodes as well. So, turning to a new relationship with anxiety, would you know that in large part it would be one of doing exactly the opposite of what we tell ourselves, or something inside is telling us when we're having bad anxiety or a panic attack. The new relationship has us allowing ourselves to experience it and stay with it and change the messages we give ourselves about it. And to do it, hopefully most of the time, with support. As if you read my description of Grace on the ropes course, that was exactly what was happening. She was learning a new relationship with anxiety with support. The new relationship with anxiety not only helps to diffuse the awfulness of the experience, but it paves the way for us to be able to be in experiences then that will allow us to grow, that allows us to reap the many rewards that are there if we can allow ourselves to have the experiences that before that we would have backed away from. We would simply not have done because they would seem too terrible. The anxiety would be too overwhelming for us. My first diagnosis in my first therapy experience was generalized anxiety disorder. And until I learned a new relationship with anxiety, one frequent experience I had was something like this. Like I'd be lying quietly in bed, usually after dark, waiting to fall asleep. And all of a sudden, as if someone had thrown a switch, I could almost hear the click. I was so anxious, I had to get out of bed and go downstairs and walk around the first floor, feeling extremely anxious, with the pounding heart and the difficulty breathing and all of that, and a feeling of foreboding, really. And sometimes I had to do that for hours or until morning. And that sudden onset really spooked me because I knew what was going to follow. So what a relief, what a joy when I finally learned not only how to get through one of those much, much better without such a horrible experience, and even reached a point where I could head them off before they got started, before they really got rolling. What freedom. And I did open myself then to other experiences that before that, the anxiety would have kept me from taking on. Well, I'm going to wait to get into the new relationship with anxiety in a little more depth, and I will do that in podcast 7. In beginning to draw this podcast 6 to a close, I want to just summarize for you why my emphasis on anxiety, managing it, developing a new relationship with it. Because our retirement years, our second half of life, our elder years, they are a time of significant change, and a time when old ways that used to work for us, for the most part, don't anymore. So this means new stuff. And new stuff usually means unfamiliar, and unfamiliar means I get anxious about it. I'm much more relaxed when I'm on familiar territory. So in order to reap the benefits of this new but somewhat scary phase of our life, we're going to have to deal with anxiety. Otherwise, the anxiety will stop us from having experiences that we have to have in order to grow. The good news is that once we've done that, then we can apply that experience to almost anything that we're concerned about or that we want to move towards. In making some important changes in ourselves, then all those changes pay off in any other area of our life that we need to be concerned about or want to grow in or experience something new in. Our defenses, such as the ones we use to try to deal with anxiety in our old relationship, are always limiting. They may give us some temporary relief or take the thing away for a while, but they restrict our lives. Anxiety can be scary as all get out, but it's alive. And if you go back to the quote from James Hollis, that's exactly what he's talking about when he said, "This anxiety must be chosen over depression, for it is developmental, and depression is regressive." Anxiety will take us somewhere. Depression, at best, will keep us stuck. My next podcast, podcast 7, is From Retirement Anxiety to Retirement Joy. And I hope if you listen that it will give you an idea of the rewards of what can happen off of a new relationship with anxiety, and that the harder work, the inner work and so forth, is worth it because of the payoff in stuff that's new and alive, life-enhancing, and as the title says, even joyful. If you would like to be informed when a new podcast is out, you can go to my website, retirementwithmeaning.com, and go to the contact page and let me know that you would like to be informed when a new podcast is out. And I will add you to the list, and then every time a new one is out, you will know it and hopefully listen. And I will welcome your comments and suggestions and questions and do my best to answer them either in the program or in a direct answer to you, which I should be able to do unless this takes off and I wind up with so many questions I can't get to all of them, and I'll try to get to the ones then that would have the most relevance to the most people. So while I'm still early in this process, this would be a good time to get questions answered for you. I'm going to close with a quote from George Gurdjieff, not too sure about the pronunciation there, in P. D. Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous. And he says, when a man, I'm adding and a woman because it just says, when a man is not playing any of his usual roles, when he cannot find a suitable role in his repertoire, he feels that he is undressed. He is cold and ashamed and wants to run away from everybody. But the question arises, what does he want? A quiet life or to work on himself? If he wants a quiet life, he must certainly, first of all, never move out of his repertoire. In his usual roles, he feels comfortable and at peace. But if he wants to work on himself, he must destroy his peace. To have them both together is in no way possible. Thanks for listening.